They say the dead hold secrets better than the living. But what if a body itself became a weapon? What if a corpse lying still beneath Westminster Abbey commanded more power than any army England ever mustered? March 24th, 1603, a woman died. But history books, as you know them, leave out so much. They omit the crucial details. They erase the true narrative of her final moments. She did not die peacefully in a royal bed, prayers whispered on her lips. She died standing upright for weeks, refusing to lie down. Her eyes remained open, fixed on shadows only she could perceive. Her ladies-in-waiting whispered, certain the Queen had finally lost her mind. Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen, the woman who faced down the Spanish Armada and emerged victorious, the monarch who transformed a struggling island into a vast empire, dead at 69, and before her body was even cold, the elaborate pretense began. This is not the story you believe you know. This is the narrative they buried, locked away for centuries, because its truth would dismantle everything the British monarchy claimed to be. Let us explore what truly transpired in that room. Richmond Palace had borne the scent of decay for weeks before Elizabeth's passing. It was not the sterile odour of illness, but something deeper, more unsettling, something actively putrefying. Servants tirelessly scrubbed floors with lavender and rosemary. They burned incense until their eyes streamed, but nothing could dispel it. The stench, a living thing, seeped from the Queen's chambers. Inside, Elizabeth herself had become a spectral presence, haunting her own fading body. Imagine her, a woman who once captivated rooms with a single glance, now propped against cushions, her legs too weak to hold her. Her face, that iconic visage captured in countless portraits, was hidden beneath a thick white paste. It cracked whenever she attempted to speak. What lay beneath? We will get to that. For now, understand you are not prepared for it. Her chief lady, Catherine Howard, later confided in a letter to her sister, a letter swiftly destroyed. Her Majesty's mind has fled, she wrote. She speaks to her father, dead these 50 years. She argues with spectres. Last night she screamed of men in black coming through the walls. The doctors, powerless, stood in the corners. What could they possibly do? They could not even properly examine her. You do not touch a queen. You do not undress her. You do not probe beneath the silks, the jewels, the elaborate deceptions. So they merely watched her slow, agonizing decline over many weeks. But to truly grasp the horror of her death, we must first understand the nightmare of her survival. Let us rewind to 1536. A little girl, barely 3 years old, watched her mother walk towards a scaffold. Anne Boleyn, the woman who fractured England from Rome, the woman Henry VIII destroyed when she failed to provide him with a son. They prevented Elizabeth from witnessing the execution directly, but she heard it, the roar of the crowd, then the terrible echoing silence. Then nothing. Her mother's head had rolled, Elizabeth's entire world shattered. In that singular moment, a stark truth crystallized in the child's mind. Weakness kills, being a woman kills, needing anything from anyone kills you. She learned quickly. Growing up in Henry VIII's court was not like living in a palace. It was more akin to a slaughterhouse. Wives came and went, heads rolled. The king's mood could shift between breakfast and lunch, and someone would be dead by dinner. Elizabeth observed it all in silence, absorbing every lesson. Anne of Cleves, a rejected, but astute enough to accept her fate and survive. Catherine Howard, too young, too reckless, beheaded at 21. Catherine Parr, cautious, strategic, she survived by remaining largely invisible. The lessons were stark and unforgiving. Adapt or die. Submit or die. Make one wrong move and die. Elizabeth was exceptionally brilliant at learning. When they stripped her of her title, branding her a bastard, sending her away from court, she smiled. She curtsied. She thanked them for their mercy. But inside she was meticulously cataloguing those who had betrayed her, those who had stayed silent, and those who might prove useful later. Her father married again and again and again, each new wife a stark reminder of women's disposability. She immersed herself in Latin, Greek, philosophy, languages. She made herself so intellectually indispensable that perhaps, just perhaps, they would overlook her gender. When her brother Edward ascended the throne at 9, and Protestant fanatics burned Catholics in the streets, Elizabeth remained silent. She attended Protestant services, read her Bible, gave them no basis for accusation. And when her sister Mary became queen, burning Protestants instead, when the fires at Smithfield consumed hundreds of screaming men and women, they locked Elizabeth in the Tower of London. She was confined to the very rooms where her own mother had awaited death. Yet Elizabeth did something extraordinary. She survived. The Tower of London in 1554 was more than just a prison. It was a waiting room for death. Elizabeth knew this intimately. Every stone in her cell had borne witness to someone's final moments. The walls still bore the frantic scratches where previous prisoners had carved their names, their prayers, their desperate last thoughts. She was kept there for 2 months. 2 months of relentless interrogation. 2 months of never knowing if today would be the day they led her to the scaffold. Mary wanted her dead. The evidence against Elizabeth was tenuous. Some letters, tenuous associations with Protestant rebels. But in Tudor England, thin evidence was sufficient if the monarch desired blood. So why did Elizabeth survive? Partially, it was luck. Partially, it was because she was so exquisitely careful in her answers that they could not construct a solid case. But primarily, she understood a crucial truth. She made herself indispensable. She convinced Mary that executing her would cause more problems than keeping her alive. How? By transforming into whomever she needed to be. Catholic when Mary was observing. Sick when they pressed her too harshly for answers. She was genuinely ill during this period. Whether from stress or another ailment, it remains unclear. She presented herself as humble, obedient, utterly no threat. It was a performance, every word calculated, every tear timed perfectly, and it worked. But here is what no one truly discusses. What does such a life do to a person? Living every single day knowing that one wrong word, one slip, one moment of genuine emotion could mean your death. What does that constant pressure do to your mind, to your body? It breaks you slowly, invisibly, yet completely. Elizabeth walked out of the tower in 1555, but something fundamental had changed within her. The girl who entered was not the same as the woman who emerged. She was harder, colder, more rigorously controlled. She had learned that survival demanded never ever revealing your true self. That profound lesson would define her entire reign. It would also, in time, kill her. 1558. Mary dies, childless and largely reviled. Suddenly, impossibly, Elizabeth is queen. She is 25 years old. She has survived a murdered mother, a tyrannical father, a sickly brother and a sister, driven by deadly conviction. She had spent her entire life one mistake away from execution. Now she was the most powerful person in England. The coronation was a magnificent spectacle. Elizabeth rode through London in cloth of gold, crowds screaming her name in adoration. She smiled and waved, appearing every inch the glorious monarch. What they did not see was the pain. The bruises beneath her gown from the corset laced impossibly tight. The throbbing headache from the heavy crown, the profound terror beneath the radiant smile. Because she knew something they did not. Being queen did not make her safe. It made her a far greater target. The first directive everyone gave her, get married, produce an heir, secure the succession. It was not a suggestion, it was a demand. From her council, from Parliament, from every ambassador in Europe. The entire political establishment of England was united on this single point. A woman cannot rule alone, she needs a husband. The parade of suitors began immediately. Philip II of Spain arrived first. Her dead sister's widower, twice her age. He offered to protect England by absorbing it into his vast Catholic empire. Elizabeth met his ambassador, smiled sweetly and said she would consider it. She had no intention of considering it, but a direct refusal would have insulted Spain, potentially triggering a war. So she strung him along for years. Then came Archduke Charles of Austria, Protestant, which was better. But marrying him would tether England to the Holy Roman Empire's endless continental conflicts. Elizabeth expressed interest, dragged out negotiations, never quite committing. Eric XIV of Sweden sent portrait after flattering portrait of himself. Elizabeth hung them in her private chambers and laughed with her ladies about his desperation. She never seriously considered him. The Duke of Anjou, a young French Catholic. This one progressed further than most. Elizabeth actually seemed genuinely interested for a time, affectionately calling him her frog in letters. But he was Catholic, and England would have erupted in revolt if she married a Catholic. So after years of negotiation, it too fell apart. Then there was Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. This one was different. This one she truly loved. They were childhood friends. He had been there at her coronation leading her horse. Tall, handsome, ambitious, Protestant, perfect. Except for one insurmountable problem. He was already married to Amy Robsart. Then in 1560, Amy Robsart died. She fell down the stairs at Cumnor Place and broke her neck. The circumstances were suspicious. Immediately rumours exploded that Dudley had murdered her so he could marry Elizabeth. Some even claimed Elizabeth herself had ordered it. The scandal was immense. Elizabeth wanted to marry him anyway. She was profoundly in love, probably the only time in her life she experienced such romantic devotion. She could have done it. She was queen. She could have married whomever she pleased. But her advisors threatened to revolt. The scandal would shatter her legitimacy. Foreign powers would use it as proof that England was ruled by a murderous, immoral queen. The legitimacy of her reign would crumble, so she did not marry him. But she kept him close. She made him an earl, gave him estates, titles, and significant power. She flirted with him openly in public, allowing everyone to believe they were lovers, which drove foreign ambassadors to distraction, endlessly trying to decipher their true relationship. Were they sleeping together? Probably not. Elizabeth was far too paranoid about pregnancy. One illegitimate child and her reign would be over. But emotionally, she was as close to Dudley as she ever was to anyone. And here is where the deeper mystery begins. Years later, as Dudley lay dying, he wrote her a final letter. It was found amongst her private papers after her death, tied with a ribbon, and marked in her own hand, his last letter. In it, he cryptically mentioned the truth we alone know. The secret that bound us in sorrow rather than joy. What secret the letter does not specify. But combined with everything else, her adamant refusal to marry anyone, the conspicuous absence of children, the mysterious illnesses she suffered throughout her reign, a troubling picture starts to emerge. What if Elizabeth physically could not have children? What if something was profoundly amiss with her reproductive system? What if the Virgin Queen was not making a choice at all, but desperately hiding a medical reality that would have utterly destroyed her legitimacy and ability to rule? The evidence is fragmented, but deeply disturbing. Foreign ambassadors, whose duty it was to report every detail of potential marriage partners, wrote extensive observations about Elizabeth's appearance. Some noted her unusually deep manly voice. Others mentioned her remarkable height and strength for a woman of her era. One Spanish envoy reported that Her Majesty's form is not as other women's. He was recalled to Spain before he could elaborate. The Venetian ambassador noted Elizabeth had a very loud voice and masculine manner of speaking. Another described her as having more the bearing of a soldier than a lady. These were not intended as insults, but rather as confused, observant remarks. Elizabeth simply did not quite conform to the expected template for a woman of her time. Then there were the medical incidents. In 1566, Elizabeth fell seriously ill. High fever, profuse sweats, pain so severe she could not stand. She believed she was dying and nearly named Robert Dudley as Lord Protector. Her doctors were finally permitted to examine her, a rare and highly restricted privilege, as touching the Queen's body was almost forbidden. What they discovered was never officially recorded. But one physician, Dr. Huick, emerged from her chambers looking, according to a courtier's diary, pale and troubled, as if he had seen something that shook him to his core. He steadfastly refused to discuss what he had witnessed, not even with his colleagues. A year later, he was dead. The official cause was listed as a sudden fever. Convenient. In 1568, another alarming incident occurred. Elizabeth collapsed during a council meeting. When her ladies rushed her to her chambers and loosened her restrictive clothing, one of them fainted. The others immediately cleared the room. No explanation was ever given for what they saw. Some modern medical historians have proposed that Elizabeth may have had androgen insensitivity syndrome, AIS. This is a condition where an individual has XY chromosomes but develops externally as female because their body does not respond to testosterone. People with AIS are often taller than average, may have a deeper voice, less body hair, and crucially lack functional female reproductive organs. They appear completely female externally, but cannot menstruate or become pregnant. This condition could explain everything. Her inability to marry and have children, the hints from several sources that Elizabeth did not experience monthly cycles like other women, though these accounts are always vague. It would account for the masculine qualities observers noted, and the unsettling secret doctors saw but refused to discuss. Other historians have suggested different conditions: testicular feminization, syndrome, Swire syndrome, various intersex conditions that would have rendered pregnancy impossible while allowing her to appear outwardly female. But we will never know with certainty. The one piece of evidence that could definitively tell us, her skeleton, remains sealed within Westminster Abbey. The British establishment has refused every single request from historians and scientists to examine her remains. For over 4 centuries they have said no. In 1952, during Elizabeth II's coronation, a movement among historians to finally examine Elizabeth I's remains was denied. In 1975, when new non-invasive scanning technology became available, they asked again. Denied. In 2003, on the 400th anniversary of her death, a formal petition from multiple universities was also denied. Why? What are they protecting so fiercely? The official reason is invariably respect for the dead. Yet they have permitted examinations of other royal remains. Richard III was exhumed in 2012 and studied extensively. His skeleton was CT scanned, DNA tested, analysed in every conceivable way. Other Tudor-era burials have been investigated. Henry VI's tomb has been opened. Catherine of Aragon's remains have been examined. Even medieval monarchs have undergone study. Why not Elizabeth? What is so uniquely different about her? The answer, it seems, is disturbingly obvious. Whatever lies within that coffin would shatter the meticulously crafted legend. And that legend, the Virgin Queen, pure and powerful and eternal, is considered far more valuable to Britain than the truth ever could be. But let us move forward. For whether Elizabeth could bear children or not, she spent 45 years asserting that she chose not to. This choice, genuine or forced, exacted a profound cost. Let us discuss the poison she applied daily. Elizabeth's iconic look, ghostly white skin, vivid red lips, fiery red hair, is immortalised in hundreds of portraits. Every painting shows the same flawless porcelain face, an image achieved through a daily ritual that slowly, relentlessly killed her. The white makeup was called Venetian ceruse. It was immensely fashionable in courts across Europe. Its recipe, white lead mixed forward with vinegar. Sometimes arsenic was added to enhance its adherence to the skin. You read that correctly. Lead and arsenic, applied to the face every single day. The application process was elaborate. First, the skin was washed with an acidic mixture, designed to prepare it, but which actually caused damage. Then the ceruse was applied in thick, deliberate layers, layer upon layer, until the skin appeared perfectly white, impossibly smooth. The effect, particularly under candlelight, was striking. With her stark white face, crimson lips, and elaborate gowns, Elizabeth must have appeared otherworldly, a living statue, a goddess made flesh. But lead is a potent neurotoxin. It does not merely rest upon the skin, it absorbs through it, entering the bloodstream, permeating the bones, infiltrating the brain. The symptoms of chronic lead poisoning read like a precise catalogue of Elizabeth's documented health problems. Headaches. She suffered from severe recurring headaches throughout her adult life, so debilitating she sometimes had to cancel public appearances. Abdominal pain. Her ladies frequently reported she could barely eat due to stomach cramps. Joint pain and muscle weakness. By her 40s, Elizabeth struggled with stairs. By her 50s, she needed assistance to stand after prolonged sitting. Mood swings and irritability. Elizabeth was legendary for her volatile temper. One moment charming, the next screaming. She once threw a slipper at a minister. Another time, she slapped a lady-in-waiting for a minor error. Memory problems and confusion. In her later years, courtiers noted Elizabeth would occasionally lose track of conversations or forget recent discussions. Insomnia. She slept a little, often pacing her chambers at night. Her ladies took shifts to stay awake with her. Anemia. Historical accounts consistently describe her as frequently pale and weak, often needing to sit during events where she would normally stand. All these symptoms are consistent with chronic lead poisoning. For 45 years, Elizabeth slowly poisoned herself. and she could not stop. Every public appearance demanded she look ageless, eternal, divine. The mask was not vanity, it was political survival. Any sign of weakness, any crack in the facade, and the predatory forces would immediately gather. Spain constantly sought an excuse to invade. Catholic assassins ceaselessly plotted. Her own nobles continually calculated whether a different monarch would serve them better. Elizabeth's power rested entirely on her image of invincibility. So every morning her ladies applied the poison, layer after layer, until her face was a stark white shield. The lead soaked so deeply into her skin that even after washing it off at night, a white residue remained in every pore. Beneath the makeup, the damage accumulated, year after year. By her 40s, her skin was dry and flaking. The lead was actively destroying her skin's natural moisture barrier. Her ladies had to apply increasingly thick layers to conceal the damage. By her 50s, she developed open sores, initially small, then growing larger. The lead was literally corroding her skin. They covered these sores with extra makeup, which only exacerbated them, demanding even more makeup. A relentless, vicious cycle. By her 60s, according to one lady's secret testimony given years later, Elizabeth had patches of blackened flesh on her face and neck. These spots wept yellow fluid and would not heal. Necrosis, tissue death from decades of lead exposure. But in public she remained perfect, luminous, untouchable, the fairy queen Gloriana. The portraits from her later reign are revealing. They become increasingly stylized, progressively unrealistic. The rainbow portrait from around 1600 depicts Elizabeth as a young woman, despite her being nearly 70. No wrinkles, perfect skin, it is not a portrait of a person. It is an icon, a symbol. Because the real Elizabeth, the woman beneath the paint, was irrevocably falling apart. The corset was her other instrument of torture. Elizabethan court fashion mandated a specific silhouette. An impossibly tiny waist, a flat chest, a rigidly triangular torso. To achieve this, women wore corsets reinforced with whalebone, wood or steel, laced so tightly they could barely breathe. Elizabeth wore hers tighter than anyone, by necessity. At state functions, she needed to stand for hours without betraying fatigue. The corset held her upright when her body yearned to collapse. It was a cage, a prison, structural support for a building crumbling from within. A properly laced Elizabethan corset reduced your waist by 4 to 6 inches. Elizabeth's ladies reported lacing hers even tighter, 6 to 8 inches of compression every single day for 45 years. What does that do to a human body? Your ribs bend inward. Over time, they deform permanently. Your lungs cannot fully inflate. Your breathing becomes shallow perpetually, never quite drawing enough air. Your liver is compressed and displaced. Your intestines are squashed. Digestion becomes agonizing because there is nowhere for your stomach to expand. Standing or sitting, she endured constant discomfort. Lying down offered the only relief, yet even that was limited because her rib cage had been permanently reshaped. Autopsy reports from other noble women of the era reveal the damage. Cracked ribs, indented livers, compressed lungs with severely reduced capacity, spinal deformities from the constant unnatural posture. Elizabeth's ladies reported that when they finally cut the corset from her corpse, her torso was covered in deep grooves, permanent indentations in her flesh where the bones had pressed for 45 years. The grooves were so deep you could see the outline of the corset structure imprinted in her skin, like a fossil. Imagine that. Imagine your clothing leaving permanent marks in your very body. Imagine that level of unceasing pressure for 4 decades. But Elizabeth could not stop wearing it. Without it, she would appear weak, soft, human. She needed to appear superhuman. Every public appearance was an endurance test. Standing in the corset for hours, breathing shallowly, in constant pain, smiling. And if she showed even a flicker of discomfort, any hint of weakness, it would be in every ambassador's report by nightfall. Spain would hear, France would hear, Rome would hear, and they would all begin calculating how much longer England's queen would last. So, she stood, she smiled, and she slowly destroyed her body to preserve her power. The 1570s and 1580s brought new, immense pressures that made everything worse. Mary, Queen of Scots, arrived in England in 1568, fleeing a rebellion in her own country. She was Elizabeth's cousin. She was Catholic. She was beautiful. Crucially, she was fertile. Mary had a son, something Elizabeth did not. And according to Catholic Europe, Mary was the rightful Queen of England, as Elizabeth was considered an illegitimate bastard, born of an illegal marriage. Mary was a constant living threat. Merely by existing, she gave every Catholic in England someone to rally around, a legitimate alternative. Every plot against Elizabeth inevitably centred on Mary. The Ridolfi plot in 1571. Assassinate Elizabeth, marry Mary to the Duke of Norfolk, place her on the throne, discovered and thwarted. The Throckmorton plot in 1583. A planned Spanish invasion coordinated with an uprising to murder Elizabeth and crown Mary. Discovered and stopped. The Babington plot in 1586. This was the one that finally sealed Mary's fate. A group of young Catholic nobles planned to kill Elizabeth and free Mary. The plot was meticulously infiltrated by Elizabeth's spymaster, Francis Walsingham. He allowed it to develop, gathering irrefutable evidence until he had proof that Mary knew about and approved of Elizabeth's assassination. Elizabeth hesitated for months. Mary was an anointed queen chosen by God. Executing her would establish a terrifying precedent, that monarchs could be held accountable, even legally killed. It would undermine the entire concept of the divine right of kings. But finally, in February 1587, Elizabeth signed the death warrant. Mary was beheaded at Fotheringhay Castle. Elizabeth claimed afterward that the warrant was dispatched without her final approval, that her secretary had acted without authorization. This was almost certainly a lie, a strategic maneuver to avoid direct responsibility while still achieving the necessary outcome. But here is what is truly interesting. After Mary's execution, Elizabeth plunged into a deep depression that lasted for months. Some historians believe it was merely political theatre, a performance to show Europe she had no other choice. But her ladies reported it was profoundly real. Elizabeth barely ate, barely slept, sitting for hours, staring blankly into space. Was it guilt? Perhaps. Mary was her cousin. They had never met in person, but they had corresponded for years. Elizabeth had kept Mary imprisoned for 19 years before ultimately sending her to her death. Or was it something else? Was it the painful recognition that she had just eliminated the one woman in England who embodied everything Elizabeth was not? Mary had been married 3 times, had a son, had been desired and loved and betrayed and lost everything, and yet she still possessed something Elizabeth never would: a biological legacy. Elizabeth ruled England, but Mary's son, James, would inherit it. That knowledge must have been profoundly bitter. But killing Mary did not end the threat, it intensified it. Now, Philip II of Spain had the perfect, undeniable excuse for war. The Spanish Armada, 1588, the largest invasion force England had ever faced. 130 ships, 30,000 men. The plan: sail up the English Channel, link up with the Spanish army in the Netherlands, invade England, depose Elizabeth, and restore Catholicism. If it had succeeded, Elizabeth would have been executed. England would have become a Spanish puppet state. The Protestant Reformation in England would have been erased. Elizabeth was 54 years old. She was in constant pain from the lead poisoning, the crushing corset, and what was likely undiagnosed arthritis. She was suffering from the deep depression that followed Mary's execution, barely sleeping due to tormented nightmares and immense political pressure. Yet she rode out to Tilbury to address her troops. This is one of the most famous moments in English history. Elizabeth in armour, or rather, a ceremonial breastplate worn over her dress, astride a white horse, surrounded by her soldiers. Her speech: "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too, and think foul scorn that Parma or Spain or any prince of Europe should dare to invade the borders of my realm." It is magnificent, it is inspiring. It has been quoted for 400 years as an unparalleled example of courage and leadership. What they do not tell you is what happened immediately before and after that momentous address. Elizabeth was so weak from a recent illness, likely another flare-up of whatever chronic condition she was concealing, that she could barely mount her horse. Her ladies had to practically lift her into the saddle. They gave her wine mixed with something, possibly a stimulant, to keep her alert and upright during the review. She was magnificent. For 3 hours she embodied every inch the warrior queen. She rode along the lines, making eye contact with her soldiers, projecting an image of unwavering strength, absolute confidence and a certainty of victory. It was a performance, the greatest performance of her life. And it worked. The soldiers transformed from nervous apprehension to fanatical devotion. They would have followed her into hell itself. After, she collapsed completely. She could not leave her chambers for a week. The pain was so severe she could not eat solid food. Her doctors whispered of internal bleeding but could not examine her to confirm their suspicions. One of her ladies wrote in a private letter, "Her Majesty's triumph at Tilbury has cost her dearly. She suffers greatly, though none are permitted to speak of it. I fear what this constant strain does to her body." But publicly it was a triumph. The Armada was destroyed, partly by English tactics, partly by the ferocious Atlantic storms that scattered and sank the Spanish fleet. England celebrated. Elizabeth became Gloriana, the immortal queen, the Protestant champion, and in her private rooms she bled and suffered and meticulously put the mask back on. The 1590s were when everything truly began to unravel. Robert Dudley died in 1588, just weeks after the Armada's defeat. Fever and stomach illness, probably cancer. He was 55. Elizabeth had loved him for 30 years. She locked herself in her rooms and would not emerge, would not eat, would not see anyone. Her counsellors had to threaten to break down the door before she finally appeared. She wore his last letter in a small pouch around her neck for the rest of her life. She kept every gift he had ever given her. She forbade anyone from speaking ill of him in her presence. The grief was profound and real. The only man she had ever truly loved was gone, and she was utterly alone. She attempted to fill the immense void with new favourites. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, Dudley's stepson. 20 years Elizabeth's junior, handsome, charismatic, utterly reckless. She adored him, gave him commands, forgave his repeated mistakes, defended him against his many critics. It was almost a maternal doting, and Essex took advantage. He was arrogant, convinced he was indispensable. When she sent him to Ireland to quell a rebellion, he failed miserably, made an unauthorised truce with the rebels, and then rushed back to England without permission. He burst into Elizabeth's private chambers early one morning, unannounced, utterly unauthorised. Elizabeth was still in her nightgown. Her wig was off. Her makeup was off. For the first time in decades, someone saw Elizabeth's real face. Essex froze. Accounts differ on precisely what he saw, but all agree he was profoundly shocked. He stammered an apology and backed out. Elizabeth never forgave him for that, not for the political failures, but for seeing her without the mask. In 1601, Essex attempted to stage a coup, trying to march on the palace with armed supporters. It was pathetic, crumbling immediately, but it was treason. Elizabeth signed his execution warrant. According to her ladies, she wept openly as she signed it, but she signed it nonetheless. Essex was beheaded on February 25th, 1601. He was 34 years old. After his execution, Elizabeth was never truly the same. The depression that had always shadowed her finally consumed her. She stopped caring about appearances, stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping. Her counsellors desperately begged her to name an heir. She refused, perhaps out of superstition. Naming an heir felt like an invitation to death, perhaps out of shrewd political calculation. The moment she named an heir, that person would become the focal point of every plot and scheme, and she would become irrelevant. Or perhaps she simply no longer cared. The physical decay accelerated dramatically in her final years. By 1600, Elizabeth had lost most of her teeth. The lead and the sugar she consumed compulsively had utterly rotted them away. Her breath smelled terrible. She began stuffing her cheeks with cloth to maintain the illusion of her face's shape in public, which made speaking difficult and eating almost impossible. Her hair was gone, wiped out by the lead, the relentless stress and sheer age. She wore increasingly elaborate wigs, some piled 2 feet high, decorated with jewels, pearls and gold wire. They were so heavy they gave her constant headaches, but she needed them, needed the illusion of youth and vigour. Her hands shook constantly, tremors that made writing difficult, made holding things uncertain. This could have been more lead poisoning, perhaps early Parkinson's disease, or simply the accumulated damage from 70 years of stress and survival. Her eyesight was failing. She could barely read anymore without glasses, which she vehemently refused to wear in public because they made her look old. And then there was the smell. Multiple sources from her final years allude to it, always carefully, always euphemistically. The Queen requires much perfume in her chambers. Her Majesty's apartments must be well aired daily, but one lady-in-waiting's private letter, written years after Elizabeth's death, is far more explicit. There was a corruption in Her Majesty's body that no perfume could disguise, a smell of sickness and decay that pervaded her rooms. We burned incense constantly, but it only masked the worst of it. What was causing it? A tumour, an abscess from the corset's constant crushing pressure, an internal infection that her immune system, compromised by lead poisoning, could no longer fight off. We do not know, but something inside Elizabeth Tudor was rotting while she still lived, and she knew it, had to know it, but she could not acknowledge it. She could not seek proper medical care because that would mean admitting weakness, a vulnerability she could never show, even if she suffered in silence. The pervasive smell of her own decay following her through the Grand Palace. By late 1602, the courtiers could clearly see the end approaching. Elizabeth was visibly failing. Thinner, weaker, more confused. Her famous temper was giving way to strange, quiet moods where she would sit for hours, saying absolutely nothing. Foreign ambassadors wrote urgent dispatches to their kings. Prepare for transition. England's queen is dying. But Elizabeth kept performing, kept appearing in public with her white face, red wig and elaborate gowns, kept insisting everything was fine, until she simply could not anymore. January 1603. Elizabeth is 69 years old. She has been queen for 44 years. She is utterly exhausted. She stops wearing the makeup, just stops. Her ladies are horrified. Without it, everyone will see the scars, the discoloration and the damage accumulated over decades. She no longer cares. I am past caring what they see, she reportedly told one lady. Let them look. She stops eating, not by choice, but because swallowing has become agonizing. Her throat is swollen, her stomach cannot tolerate food. She manages only sips of broth, some wine, nothing more. Her abdomen swells grotesquely. She looks 6 months pregnant. A cruel, twisted joke for the Virgin Queen. It is likely fluid accumulation from organ failure. Her liver and kidneys shutting down, unable to process waste, fluid backing up into her body cavity. The symbolism is devastating. After a lifetime of virginity, of refusing marriage and children, her body mocks her with the appearance of pregnancy. She refuses to go to bed. This becomes the defining feature of her final weeks. Her doctors beg her. Her counsellors plead with her. Her ladies try everything to persuade her. She will not do it. She sits in chairs, leans against piles of cushions on the floor. Her ladies take shifts holding her upright. Days pass, then a week, 2 weeks, she barely speaks. When she does, it is fragments. Names of people long dead, half-remembered prayers in Latin. Sometimes she laughs for no apparent reason. Sometimes